Hey. Hi there, everybody, and welcome to this week's Writers Chat. And this is the place where writers like to gather. We talk about all things about writing for writers and by writers. So we're really glad to see you all here today and have a lot of our regulars in the group. And I know quite a few of you that are going to watch the replay. We've heard couldn't be here this morning, but are going to definitely plan to watch the replay because we got a great topic and super guest today. My name is Jean Wise. I'm one of the co-hosts, and I'm joined today. Melissa's going to help monitor the chat and help do the recording. And I am joined today by one of my co-hosts, regulars, Bethany Jett. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Bethany, for you to introduce our guest and our topic today. So go for it.
I am so excited to have our special guest, Stephanie Jones, here today because she is absolutely brilliant. And honestly, we could do this for 3 hours and I would still be asking questions and taking notes. So I'm super excited. So Stephanie is incredible. Like, I know just from your bio, you worked for a Fortune 100 company and had a lot of success there. And Stephanie also is incredible at self-publishing and speaking and tying those two things together to really be able to earn an income from books and the marketing that comes along with having to handle it on your own as it's a self-publisher. She's amazing. So I'm so excited that we can kind of merge a little bit of those two topics because they work so well hand in hand, particularly for nonfiction. And Stephanie's also, her brand is Giving Gal, and I'll let her share a little bit about that, but she is all about giving back and finding ways to incorporate that message with the organizations she speaks at, and she's amazing. So Stephanie, welcome, and tell us about you and Giving Gal and what you're doing, and then we'll just jump right in.
Yeah, no, thank you guys so much for having me. I think this is the second time, so if you guys are interested in speaking, go back and, and look at the serious writers chat that we did on speaking, and that was a great time. I always love being here. And yeah, I started writing my book. It took me I went on a little journey. I gave a gift every day for 522 consecutive days. And that journey, I was blogging a little bit. It turned into a little book called The Giving Challenge. And today I know we're focused on self-published, so that's where I'll focus my piece of my story. And then if you guys have additional questions, but I'll be honest, like back when I started doing it, I did not have this community. I did not know the Bethanys of the world and the Michelles and the Johnnies. You were just kind of like out there on your own going, what the heck do I do? And I didn't even know about like having an agent and what the options were. And so I originally published with a vanity publisher. And I will say, this is just my personal opinion, that was probably the biggest mistake that I made. But with that, with our mistakes, with failures, we always, we have a choice to see what we can learn from that. And so I ended up pulling my book, and kind of in the middle of that, went to a conference. I didn't have an agent, and I had one of the big 5 publishers interested in my book, The Giving Challenge. They took it. Bethany and I worked on a proposal, which you guys know, if you've worked on a proposal, it's like just as hard as writing the book sometimes it feels like. But at that time, when I'm going through the proposal, I remember being so overwhelmed by what I was committing to do to sell the book, and thinking, how am I going to do this? Like Bethany said, I still work for a Fortune 100 company. I have a day job, and I do speaking. I kind of have all this stuff on the side, and I thought, oh my gosh, my life is going to become this one book. And it got all the way to the end to pub board and then got rejected. And I thought I would be devastated with that rejection, but my first feeling was relief. And I knew that was a blessing for me, because I thought I was relieved that I didn't know how I was going to do everything. Now, I feel like if God had a different path for me, then I would have figured it out, like we all do. We all kind of figure it out when doors are open. But I think, I always kind of look back and sometimes ask the question of why? Why did I go through that? Why did it go to a big publisher? They obviously saw something. But for me, it gave me confidence in my book because I thought if there was a big five that thought it was good enough to at least take their time, their effort, then I had something. But I also had a choice now of what do I do with this book? You know, I pulled it from the vanity publisher. And also I just start thinking about what was my goal. My original goal was I never wanted to write a book. That was never my intention. So the thought of a second book was not even in my radar when I originally published. But as you guys know, sometimes once you get into writing, God opens the floodgates and, you know, starts downloading all different ideas. And so then I really started looking at the business side of it. I am a speaker, and could I do this on my own? Could I start my own press company, publish the Giving Challenge under my own company, and then look at my second book, and could I do that on my own? So I started researching, like, what does it take? I started lining up resources. You know, like I said in the beginning, I didn't have those resources, but now I work with Platinum Literary Services to help me with the editing. That was somebody that I didn't have before to come in. I knew that I could trust and have a good editor. I have a designer now. I have a formatter. These are all things that you need, and you need somebody that's good. You want to put out a good quality book. As you guys know, I've seen a lot of books that are self-published and they are not good, but that represents you and your brand and what you're trying to do. So that's a little bit about my story. I have a second book that hopefully will be out in December. I kind of keep delay, but you know, before the end of the year. And I've done everything on that book 100% myself. So I feel like I've been through everything from a vanity publisher to looking at going to traditional publishing to self-publishing on my own. So I'll kind of end it there, and then if you guys have questions, or Bethany, however you guys want to go.
I love how you've taken your story and taken the lessons, because I think when we start out, especially as writers on this writing journey, we have no idea. So what we don't know is, now that I look back, it's almost frightening, you know. And that your journey is really a perfect example of that, and it really is on that.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You know, and your thing about be sure to, it's a quality thing. I think we need to really talk about that a little bit today, about self-publishing, because Rhonda, I think it was Rhonda, said she's seen some books that's really made her cringe, self-published books, you know, and I think that's my biggest fear. I really want to put out a product that's well done on that. So I think we got to hold that standard up when it comes to self-publishing.
Yeah, we really do. And I will even say, like, in the beginning with that was the other thing with the vanity publisher, is I was not happy with the printer. So you even think about, you could have a good editor, a good designer, and then when it goes to print, you have to know the printer that you're using. What's that book going to look like? What's the colors? You know, so I had a batch of books that I'm still trying to offload. I mean, now I just give them out for free. Because the print was so bad, you know, it did not match what the original design and proof. So those are the things also that you have to think about. And if you're not working with a traditional publisher, that falls on you to fight that battle and to kind of decide what you're going to take on. And, you know, you really become a negotiator, and it becomes a part of the business. So you really have to decide, if I'm going to take this on, I own everything and am responsible for everything. And that's even the quality of what it looks like. So you can have a great book inside, you can have a great cover design, but even, you know, do you have a good printer that you're working with?
Yeah, and that could be very overwhelming, that step. I don't know if you got some tips with us to help us get through that stage of it, but to do the whole kit and caboodle, wow.
Yeah, I think in the beginning, that's why I was so overwhelmed, and that's why I went with a vanity publisher, because it was too much. It was like, oh my gosh, I don't even know how to write a book, let alone like get one published or know everything. So I think start with what you know. You know, my biggest thing that I tell people, like right now, I have a couple of people that want to publish under my press company, and then I'm helping. And my first thing is, like, we get so excited about publishing, and we get so excited about that. And I'm like, go write, like, where are you at in writing the book? And I mean, I'm the biggest like offender of this. I mean, my first book took me 4 to 5 years to get out. But I think, you want to ensure that you're writing that book also, because really you can't start the publishing, especially on the traditional publishing or on the self-publishing. Traditional, you don't have to have a lot of it written. Obviously, you've got to decide if you're going to have an agent and the proposal and that whole process. But if you're going to traditionally publish, you got to have the book written before you even start with your editors and, everything that has to go with it. So, that's where I tell people to start and to make sure that you have some people to bounce off of, the book and the topic and how you kind of put everything together.
How much would you say people should expect to pay if they're wanting to produce like a quality book? Because that cost, that's another factor to consider. What would you recommend a range if you want to give a range?
Exactly. So that's a good point. I mean, and that is one of the downsides, because you do take on all the costs, you take on all the risk, you're not getting anything up front. So it really depends on word count. So if I look at when I'm working with editors, if I'm working with my formatter, the cover, like the things that go into that can affect the cost is, do you have an idea of what your cover looks like? And, do you kind of have your own little design and you're handing it off to somebody, or are you relying upon them to be totally creative and create something from scratch? The design within your book, is it a simple, traditional, nonfiction book, or do you have designs and pictures and those types of things? That will increase the cost of your book because it increased the time that a designer would take. And then the word count, if you have a 30,000 word book, that's going to be a lot less than a 60,000 word book. So I would say you're looking at, for good quality, probably on the low end, 3,500 to maybe 5,000 to 6,000 is what I've seen. And that's just recently. I've done like about a 35,000 word book that I'm working on, and I have one that's 60,000. And that's where we're at. And you're thinking about, like, for me, I kind of have a package that if I work with a client, they're also paying me to handle the ISBN and the Library of Congress number and kind of doing a cursory and lining everything up. So I would say that's the initial range. Now that might sound, it is a lot of money. I don't want to say it sounds like a lot of money. It is a lot of money, but if you think about it, like now on my book, The Giving Challenge, I profit so from the Vanity Publisher, I was profiting through Amazon about $1.20 a book. That's what I was making. Now, if I sell through my website, or when I sell it speaking, or even if I'm partnering with a company, I'm making about $10 to $12 a book. So if you run the numbers, let's just do $10 a book. I have to sell 500 books. If it costs me $5,000, I have to sell about 500 books to break even. So that's where, if you're going to self-publish, you really have to start thinking like a business person. And for me, you have to ask yourself, can I sell 500 books? Yeah, I know I can do that. So, and then anything beyond that, really, unless I'm spending it on marketing or something like that, starts to be profitable for me, that book. Especially if I continue. I've seen where a lot of people, especially when they self-publish, one of the downfalls is they do a big launch day. They may push their book for that week, a couple of months, and then they really fall off. And that's where you might not have any profit, or you might not even break even, which for me, my book came out in 2017, and I'm still selling quite a bit. I had a really good year the first year. I remodeled the house in 2018, so I saw a dip. And then this year, I'm back up. I've probably tripled my sales from last year. So, life happens, but, I've way more than recouped what I have in that book. And then it's easy money for me, especially for speaking. I literally go in and print how many copies I need, ship it 2 minutes, you know, and I can make a couple $1,000s.
Yeah, it sounds like to me, like, especially editing, is that probably the biggest cost and all that? The editing, and editing of the different types of editing that you might need depending on what the book is, correct?
Yep. And so Bethany, do you want to talk about your guys' service and like the 3 types of editing I typically use you guys for? But that is a big chunk. And then, like I said, the formatting and the cover design are usually less than the editing, but it depends on how much design work you're going to have. So, you know, and the number of words, how long that book is. So right now I'm seeing some of like the design and the formatting be similar to some of the editing, just because of the type of book that, you know, the person that I'm working with wants to put out. So, but Bethany, do you want to talk about like the 3 types of editing that I use you for when I start a book?
So it's been a privilege to work with Stephanie on her books at Platinum Literary Services. So when it comes to editing, like the names change. Like there's not really an industry standard for like this type of editing is called this, but there's sort of like a lot of people will use this kind or this word. So we say developmental or content editing is where someone goes through and says, we need more story here. This doesn't really fit. Let's take this out, and kind of just massages the book that way, where you're kind of getting an overview of what needs to be moved or changed or added. So there's still like a writing process to come after that for the author. What we do a lot of is what we call line editing, which I think most people call that the proofreading, but line editing, where you go through and you're looking for like grammar or word choice. Still, also a lot of our editors will, like my mom, for example, because she's great at this, she also will look for content stuff too. So she might say, well, this doesn't seem to really fit here. You consider moving it, and give suggestions based on that too. So that's like a big editing for us anyway, or for most books need to go through that. And then the proofread is like the final. They're not looking at content. They are just looking to make sure everything is spelled correctly, that lay versus lie is used properly, where that probably was caught in the line, you know, the before edit, but they're just double checking all of those kinds of things to make sure when it goes to the, you know, the printer, things are good. And like we do a 95% like perfect rate, which seems to be a standard across like a lot of editors, because like even my books who have gone through editors and editors of traditional houses, there'll still be like a typo or a missed period or something. So so a lot of editors will error rate, you know, you've got this like tiny little error, but the goal is to get it to 100% ready to go so that it's perfect.
Rhonda asked a good question, and maybe this might be a next good topic to for you, Stephanie, to talk about working with a print for demand publisher, or do you print some quantity up yourself and take care of the shipping and all that yourself? Can you explore those 2 distribution kind of areas?
Yeah, that's a good question. I originally, so the Giving Challenge, I originally just used Ingram Spark for that. And I do not have that set up for distribution yet outside of myself. So you can go in there and choose, like, do you just want to use it for print? They ship to you. You handle everything on the shipping piece. I will probably start in January opening up for distribution. And I have a couple other reasons why I had not done that. And so then they can handle, especially if you're looking at libraries and bookstores and those types of companies, they can order directly. And I think it's about 40% off is what, you know, library or bookshop would get through Ingram. Now, with that said, what I have found is the cost of the book is a bit higher per print. And I haven't seen like a big discount with the quantity that, you know, if I go up more books, so let's say I order 200 books and then I go to 500 and then I go to 1,000, I didn't see much of a price change from 150 to 1,000, which that eats into your profit, you know, if you're thinking about a business person. So I have a printer now, just like a standalone printer, that I will get my first shipment of 1,000 of the Giving Challenge from them. And it's about maybe a little under $2 per book cheaper at 1,000. And the shipping cost wasn't that bad. Like, I think when I did the average on the shipping cost, it added, I don't know, it was like 26 a book or something like that. It was still underneath what I was paying at Ingram. I did get a proof, so until I get the big shipment of like crossing my fingers and praying, that everything looks and feels. I mean, that's the other thing of, like what's your book going to feel like and the colors and that. So if that works for me and I found a really good printer, my profits just went up on my book. And I have not, I guess I would consider, I don't know if Ingram would be considered print on demand. Like, I haven't done KDP or anything like that. Did I answer all the questions there?
I think so. And I think Ingram are considered a print on demand. I've not used them personally, but I've studied them, and I think they are a print on demand.
Yeah. Now, I will say one thing that I like about Ingram. So Bethany talked about some of the marketing. Like, I have a company that I've partnered with. They use my book as a promotional giveaway. And with Ingram, I can go in when I do an order with them and do a first page insert and customize. So I can put that company, like a note from that company. I can put their logo. It costs about 50 cents a book, but I just pass that cost along to the customer. And so that's been nice too. Now, again, my profits are a little bit lower, but they're usually ordering, a couple hundred books, and they like that added value. So, you kind of have to weigh. I don't think the printer that I'm using for my bulk can do that. So you might want to look at those types of, specialties that printers can add. The other thing too is, so far I can keep up with my shipping. It is a pain in the butt. It does take time. I probably do, like, I include a note. I personalize everything. I sign every book. So I am putting a little bit of time into that just to create like this experience for my customer. But also I'm capturing all their contact information. And for me, I love that, So for my next book coming out, that was the bad thing about the Vanity publisher, which I've even considered going back to them and trying to get, because that first year working with them, I sold probably a couple of thousand books and I have no idea who bought them. So that's been a downfall for me. And probably if you traditional publishes, you don't have that relationship with the customer, where for me, now I know everybody that bought a book. I also track of how they found me, if I know that. Sometimes through Amazon, I don't know. But a lot of times I can tell, like, oh, I spoke at this event, and then I see what their shipping address is, and I can make the assumption of they came and ordered a book, or, I can see click-throughs on newsletters, that sort of thing. So that's been a benefit for me on the self-publishing, because now on my next book, The Gratitude Challenge, I can do a mailer to those people if I wanted to, send them a postcard or something.
That's super important too, because I don't know anybody who bought my first book, because I wasn't doing an email list. Like, I was just rejecting all of this stuff because I was so new and green. And I look back and I'm like, it's so hard then I can't capture those sales anymore because I have no idea who they were. And so I think that's like super important. And I wanted to say too about, you said marketing. That is something that we've started adding into like our proposals, is not just like the initial, like what we're going to do when the book comes out, but we started creating like a year-round marketing plan, like with the publishers, and saying, okay, we're going to do it for this season, but then the next season, here's the plans for like that, kind of making that evergreen model. Because then, like, once you do it that first year, everything's set up, and then you can continually sell your book because you already got the pieces in place. It's just putting it into motion and then seeing if it worked, for the rest.
Yeah, doing the work. That's the hardest part, selling that book. Like, I see something in the chat. I can't tell who said it, but they talked about like the downside. Somebody she ordered 5,000 books to get the price break, and then she only distributed 750 books. Rest are in storage. So that is, I mean, you know, you have to hustle. If you're, no matter if you're with a traditional publisher or a self-publisher, the majority of the responsibility, or at least this is what I see and talk to other people, is you're still responsible for selling those books. And so there's just no accountability on self-publishing. So for me, you know, when I was seeing all those books, I am like figuring out, how am I going to sell those books? How am I going to get them out of my, you know, door? Because I don't want to keep storing. So, you know, or just look at, like, to me, that's overwhelming to think the cost that you have in that if you haven't recouped your costs and you still have all the books. So that's something to really consider for yourself of, you know, maybe it's better not to order 5,000. You know, maybe it would have been better for her to order 1,000 and not make as much money, but she's not having to store, you know, 4,000 books at her house and continue to, like, the mental clutter that that's causing.
And Rhonda added, and I think that's exactly, it's the truth of this business anymore as writers. We're going to be almost entirely, not entirely if we traditionally publish, but almost entirely responsible for that marketing on either side, you know, or whether it's traditional or whatever. You know, and that's just the reality, the name of the game right now, I guess.
It is. And like, and if you think about it, like if you traditionally publish, you know, they're putting up all that risk too. Like it's costing them all that money because they're handling the, I mean, someone said like 70,000 is what they're investing when it comes to like all of the stuff that they're putting in. They got salaries, they got a lot of overhead built in that too, that they're like putting up front marketing. And so like, so when I hear authors say, no matter like how they're, particularly with traditional, I would say, but they don't do the marketing, it's kind of like someone just gave you like this gift of not having to upfront like the cost of this, and you're not going to market it. Like that's crazy to me. Like you can do your part here, like no matter what.
What?
I think that is very why. I mean, you know, I go back and forth with traditional and self-publishing because it does take a lot of weight off of you. You know, I don't want to say you just have to write, but you just have to write until you have to come marketing. You don't have to think about all the other stuff. Somebody else is, and you have no, you know, like when you self-publish, you have no accountability besides yourself. And so if you traditionally publish, like for me, the thought of somebody doing all that is very attractive. And also the accountability, like you are going to have deadlines. I think too, for me, Bethany and I were talking, Bethany, was it last week, is like, I also know my limits. So I would not self-publish a children's book. I do have a desire to do a children's book, but to me, I don't feel like I know enough about the children's book market. Illustrators are super expensive. Like I just got quotes on illustration, and the thought of like, okay, even if so going back to what's your goal? My goal for a children's book may not be to make a profit on that. My goal for a children's book may just be to have a children's book out there and somebody else is helping me do it, because I think I would probably be under if I did one on my own, just the cost of a good illustrator, you know, to get what you want. So I think that's the other thing, is understanding what your limitations are if you are going to self-publish, because you know, if you're doing fiction, that's different than nonfiction, and it's different than a children's book, and it's different than YA. So really, for me, staying in my own lane of what I feel like I know. And then I think the other side is starting with what's your goal, the book. So I'm working with a lady right now, and really her goal is just to have a book to tell her story and to pass out to people that she feels like, you know, may need to hear that story. And she doesn't want to take the time, you know, go through the time that it's going to take to traditionally publish.
Mm-hmm. It's a good point. Tina had a good question too in the chat about the dangers sometimes of if you your sale records might count against you if you try to re-enter traditional publishing avenue on that way. And her question was, if you self-publish and self-distribute, how will the publishing industry perceive or register your sale numbers? Can they only see the number of books that you order or that you self-distribute? So it might appear that you've sold, say, 4,000, 5,000 books, but really they're all sitting in your garage. You know, it's probably on your book proposal, I would think, is probably how you report it. Don't you think, Bethany? You might report that you've sold 4,000 of a certain self-published book. They wouldn't really have any idea to know, would they?
That's a good question. Like, does it go through Nielsen Bookscan then, Stephanie, or do you have to just say what it is?
I don't think so. So for me, I actually went through this because my book was out as a self-publisher, and then I had a traditional publisher request a proposal. And so I think it was more on, at least for me, like the honesty, and I just gave them what I knew I had sold. Now, for me, what I've started doing is, you know, I have the number from the Vanity publisher. And then since I started publishing, like, I keep a detailed Excel spreadsheet. So I can tell, you know, every person how many books they sold, where they found. So maybe I wouldn't turn over the personal information, but I have that tracker to give an exact number since I've been publishing myself. So I do think that can hurt you. But I've also seen people on the other end where they've traditionally published, they didn't do well selling the book, and they couldn't get traditionally published a second book. So I don't think, you know, I think there's just so many scenarios out there, whether you start self-publishing to traditional or traditional and you want to do a second traditional. Like, I think it all comes into play as it relates to that. So good question and good comment. I just self-reported and trusted they trust my number, I guess.
Right. I think the self-reporting and hopefully honesty would be the way to do it.
Yeah, because if you say, like, I've sold like 20,000 copies of this book, and then like there's one Amazon review on your book, like that doesn't, well, maybe not. I don't know. Yeah. Like, there are certain indicators that they can look at and see, like, that doesn't really match. And I don't know I don't know if Amazon has a reporting tool that publishers can see either.
They do.
I don't know. I know Nielsen is really expensive. I know, like, traditionally that's how they look at stuff.
Yeah. You know, you guys might want to talk about, we talked earlier on in the chat about hybrid authors. And Bethany said she wanted to be a hybrid author. I don't know if you guys want to throw that term around and talk about that term a little bit.
My mom's talked about it too, because she's got the novel that with Where Treasure Hides was published by Tyndale, but it doesn't look like she's finding a home for the next one, or even the Sparrow that she's working on. And so she's considering doing it self-publishing that one, because she wants to get the story out. And then I've got a couple of things that I'd like to do, but I'm not sure, and it falls into the same numbers game here, because I'm on a traditionally published path. If I self-publish the book with an ISBN, all of a sudden I'm reporting numbers now for a book that maybe on marketing for authors, which is just something I do on the side. And if I don't sell well on there, those numbers count for me when I'm looking for other things. So, you know, the question is, do you just do it as a PDF ebook and not put the ISBN number on it? Or do you go ahead and self-publish? And hybrid would be both traditional and self. I mean, I think that's the basic definition, Stephanie.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to, you know, I don't want to repeat myself, but like, what's your goal? And, you know, do you have a business? And what's the timing too? So like, if you have a book you want to get out and you're kind of like for me, so when the Giving Challenge went to the traditional publisher for them to vet, that was like in, I think it was the May time frame. And they wanted it to come out for Christmas. But they could not meet that Christmas, like the upcoming Christmas. It was just going to be too quick of a turnaround. So it was going to have to be the following Christmas. So they would have required me to pull my book for a year and a half. And as a speaker, I mean, that's something I really would have had to think about was, could I afford not to have a book on my speaking side of the business, which now I think that would have killed my speaking. And I look at what I've done in speaking from the time that I got rejected from them to now. That again, what's my goal? And it was actually a good thing I got rejected, because I believe my speaking business would have been stagnant until I was able to relaunch the book. Because if we're being honest, people, that gives you credibility as a speaker. If that's where you want to go, is to have a book, and people want you to do a book signing, or, they want to have, I just did a leadership seminar last week, and they wanted, as part of their package for their fee, was a signed copy of the book, that their sponsor was paying. They saw that as a benefit. So that's the other thing too, is you have to think about. So Bethany, if you're like, hey, I got this book that I want to come out, and I'm thinking about self-publishing it. If I traditionally publish, I may be looking at 1 year to 2 years to get that out. And then what's the topic of the book? Is that relevant to what you're doing, or have you moved on to something else? So, thinking about those types of things.
Good point. And then Rhonda asked about department stores and bookstores. As you're self-publishing and stuff, can you even get into libraries and all that?
Yeah, so I've been in Barnes & Noble, which that was like my goal, to be in a Barnes & Noble. Woohoo! And, but because Ingram has the distribution, but I went to that Barnes & Noble. So it was a Barnes & Noble in my community. I built a relationship with the buyer. I can't remember what her title was. Community relations, something like that. So I was a local author, went to her, and I got them to buy so many books. Now, for me, it wasn't about selling a lot of books or getting in a lot of Barnes & Noble. Like, my goal was just to be in Barnes & Noble. Like, I just wanted my picture with my book in Barnes & Noble. Again, what's your goal? I have my book in some like boutiques and independent bookstores, and I sell directly to them. Mm-hmm. And I do have some libraries. Like, I've had libraries purchased directly through Amazon. Like, I had Park City, Utah. I have no idea how the library found out about me, but I saw their order come through Amazon. And so I think if I open the distribution for Ingram, then, it'll be open to everybody. Mm-hmm. I have not spent time focusing on getting my books in bookstores and libraries. I may do that in the future, but because I have to give someone else a cut of my book, like, that's the way I think about it. I would rather just sell direct, or I would rather spend my time working on getting speaking engagements where I know I'm going to spend more, maybe if I was doing this full time. I mean, I do have a virtual assistant. So if I could increase her hours and, she's spending 4 hours a week just calling into libraries and selling that book and getting them to order and bookstores and everything like that, then maybe I would consider it. But for right now, like, I spend my time really on my speaking and, getting those books and then selling books there.
Yeah. And I liked your idea think about the boutiques. We got 2 local bookstores here in Northwest Ohio that will feature local authors. And they take a percentage, like, I think it's like 10% of whatever I sell the book for, but I still get 90%. And they call me about every 6 months and say, hey, we need more such and such, and we got a check cut for you. So it's kind of cool, in that way. But think of unique boutiques too. I have a friend who wrote a book about the Titanic. And so she contacted gift stores, like in even over in England or in Ireland, where the Titanic was built. They got a big Titanic museum there, and she contacted them, and they carry her book, So you always think unique things. I'm thinking about Melissa in Ireland. Aren't you, Melissa, going and sending your stuff? So would she find Irish pubs, I don't know, that might carry her book? I don't know, So think unique storefronts like that. Often they love to have something like that.
Well, even so my book just went through a redesign. So I changed the cover and the branding and everything like that. And I was in a coffee shop, but they kind of had a gift section. Mm-hmm. But the color of my current, of the current book does not match. So I'll give you guys an example. So the current cover is like pink and teal. And then the new cover is like real simple yellow and teal. And this cover like matched the scheme of this like coffee shop / like little gifty. And so, you know, I took a business card and I just thought, okay, when I have these books, I'm going to follow up with them because it'll fit, you know, really the environment and the colors and the feel of it. So I also look at, you know, colors of the environment, because if you notice those boutique stores, even if it's clothing, like I have my book in and it's been in there for about 2 years, and kind of same like you is that she just kind of calls me up and says, hey, I'm sold out. Can I have some more? But she has a little bit of gift items. And so she keeps my book at the register. And she said, you would not believe how many people just look down and like, oh, that's a good gift, you know, and we'll just pick up a book. Wow. So it's mainly a clothing store, but she's been able to sell, and they keep selling, so she keeps ordering them. But she takes about, I think it's like 40%, which is what you'll see sometimes in boutiques and like mom and pop bookshops or independent bookstores could be anywhere from 35 to 50% of what they'll take. So again, that's why I don't focus a lot of my time, because my, you know, return on the investment is lower.
Yeah. Leslie asked earlier, and I think we may have missed it because she thought she was asking someone else, but I think she was directed it towards you about, do you distribute through Amazon? And if so, did you go through their printing service, KDP?
Yeah. So the Giving Challenge is distributed through Amazon. I have my own shop, so they buy directly from me. I do not go through their print or their distribution. Now, with that said, I'm really pondering if I'm going to put my next book, The Gratitude Challenge, up on Amazon, at least in the beginning. And just because they take such a cut of it. And I'm having some problems like on the pricing of shipping. You know, it's like if you do free, then that eats into the cost of your book. But then like I think the next type of where I was at, it's like $3.99. Well, that's not what I'm paying for the shipping. So I just had some issues with Amazon, but I don't know. That's kind of where I'm at with them. I don't know if I will put my new, you know, cover version up there and maybe just let people sell out. That's the other thing too is, you know, now I've got used books out there, so I'm competing against people who are just like, they'll just keep dropping the price, and then I'm basically giving away my book on Amazon. Which really irritates me, but.
I know. And then Rhonda asked about how do you decide the cover price when you're self-published?
Yeah, so I, being very transparent here, I just look at similar books with, you know, same page number, similar size. Like my book, when I was through Wespo, I think it was originally like $11.99, and then when I republished it myself, like I did some updates to it, put more content. Like I'm a better writer now, so I raised the price of it to like $14.99, but it's still consistent with what I've seen in the market, and sometimes even lower than what I'm seeing in the market. So I always feel like if I'm consistent or lower. It also, what I found is, like, I'll give you an example. So with the new book, because I have it up at $14.99, I'm doing an event at a university in November, and they wanted to bulk purchase books. And if I would have had it at the $12.99, and when I was, you know, buying through the Vanity publisher, that sort of thing, it was really hard for me to adjust my prices and make any money. Well, now I feel like I have some flexibility, and they feel like they're getting a deal. So, but I'm still, you know, I'm making more profit. So when they come to me and say, hey, we can't afford $15, can you give us a discount? I can give them a 20 to 25% discount, and they think that's great. And I'm still at the point of what I was making before. You know what I mean? Like, so thinking business wise, you know.
I was going to let Bethany, you got more questions?
My internet started going out. I was like, am I still with you guys?
You're on.
You're here. We see you.
Well, I have a question that isn't about anything mentioned so far, but one thing I've noticed is talking about quality. The paper of the book really matters, because you can pick up a book that has a great cover and all of a sudden you flip it open, and this might sound really pretentious on my part, but you touch that paper and you're like, it just feels cheap. It doesn't feel like book paper. And so, like, I remember a friend of mine who was a VP who worked at he was a hybrid publisher. He's not there anymore, but he was talking about there's things that go into a book that readers expect subconsciously. And when you miss those things, it throws them off. It's like the copyright page has to look a certain way. There's certain extra pages that need to go in, like just the way readers expect. And paper was one of the things that he would talk about. Like, so when you're having to choose paper, because that's another choice that you have to make as a self-publisher, like, how do you find out what the good paper is going to be? Do you get to touch it first? Do you have to, like, do you have recommendations?
Yeah, so I can't tell you like off the top of my head of what I use, but I use of whatever the recommendation, you know what I mean? Like, this is what your standard, because they'll tell you, your printers and even like the formatter and designer that I work with is, she will tell me like, this is where you want to print at. This is what you want your cover to feel like. You know, you don't want the shiny laminated. You want, what is it, like the flat matte is what's popular now. You want how the out cover feels like. Even the color, like what is kind of popular of the color of your paper, which you don't think about that. Like, I literally, when I was going to pick the color, I had to go through like all the recent books that I bought, because I couldn't, like you said, self-consciously. And it was like, oh, they're a little, what is it? Like, I don't want to say cream, but, you know, like a lot of the books aren't just like bright white, you know, so you have to decide those types of things too. So what I typically do is look at a bunch of books and see what's trending or what's common right now. And then I work with my designer format and then work with the publisher. The other thing too is, I would say, if you're going to do this on your own, print on your own, is always get a proof. Now, my printer that I'm using right now, not Ingram, they require you to, I mean, they will send you a proof. They like 2-day, you know, ship me the proof. And so you can see and feel everything. Ingram doesn't require that, but they highly recommend it. Like, there's a box, I think, that pops up. And I would do that just so you can hold and feel, you can see everything. Like, for instance, I had a shipment from Ingram where the inside was not printed correctly. And, you know, they ended up fixing everything. But those are the things that you have to think about. Is the other thing too was like the font color, to ensure that that translate. It might look good on the paper that they send to the printer, but is it going to print out? So those are all just little things you have to pay attention to, and you've got to learn. And I've even had some say, well, yeah, this worked, you know, for this printer, and then for another printer, it didn't. So those are the things that if you traditionally publish, you don't have to think about any of it.
And I'm curious, and you said you found a local printer, or I don't know if it's local. You found a printer where you're printing your own, you're bypassing Ingram, Sparks and stuff. How'd you find that? You know, I live in a little tiny rural area. I don't even know where to start to find that.
Yeah, so I found that through my designer and formatter. She had used them, and she does quite a few books, and she works both with traditional publishers and self-publishers. And so she'd been telling me for about 2 years, like, you should try to get a quote from this printing company. Like, they'll beat the cost. Like, if you're looking at cost, but it was too overwhelming for me at first, because there was a little bit more work that had to go into working with them, which is why I'm just starting to work with them now. I actually do have a friend whose family has a printing business out in Oklahoma City. And so she's, you know, said, hey, you should get some quotes from them, which I probably eventually will, just to see, like, are they better? You know, even if you're getting 25 cents per book, if you're purchasing bulk, hey, every dollar counts. So, but that's taken time. It wasn't like I woke up one day and was like, oh, I found this printer. I think another thing too, I'll just bring up, and then if you guys have more questions, let me know, but the legal piece, that is something that makes me a little nervous. Especially, so for myself, like on the book that I have, for instance, so when I was going through Bethany's proofreader, it wasn't even, I think, 5 or 6 words from a song. It gave credit to the songwriter, everything. And she said, you need to take that out. And I thought that was very interesting because, we kind of think about quotes and stuff like that. And there's, kind of the legal of what you can get away with. So when you're self-publishing, you really do have to be careful about, can you print what you're putting in print? My second book now has stories from 10 other, I wouldn't call them authors, just 10 other people. And so I have a contract that I have them sign. That's number one, giving me permission. Number two is, it's their story to tell and they have all the liability that comes back with them. Number three, they're not going to come after me for money or royalties or anything like that. But like we have another book that I worked on with Bethany, and it's for a company and they're telling other people's stories. And it was like those people were including other people within their stories that could have been a little like risque. And so I just went to the company and said, I'm not willing to print this story. Like, we're going to have to take it out of the book or change it. And so I'm very on the side of like low risk, tolerance of that. But that's something that you have to think about is, being very, very careful of what you're putting in a book, who you're quoting, those types of things. It does make me a little nervous.
That's an extremely good point for us to be aware of and stuff. Bethany, you're being reminded to mention something. Do you were you want to bring that up?
Yeah. So we were talking about something about traditional publishing earlier, which reminded me of it. Givingtons, I haven't used them, but a publisher told me about it, and it's where they will send the books, like if you're speaking somewhere. It was about numbers, because for traditionally published, like if I call Abingdon and order like 10,000 of these and sell them myself, that 10,000 copies won't count for me when it comes to numbers, because it didn't run through Nielsen. Like I can put in there that I did that, but it's not monitored. And so Givingtons, what they do is they run everything for you. So you can order books, from what I understand, you order books from them, they ship them to the location, you sell them, and then you put the return label on the box of books that you didn't sell, probably fill out some paperwork, and then you send it back. And so basically, like, because you're not recouping the money yourself, like Stephanie gets to take that money, but they handle all that, and then all those numbers would count for you when it comes to Nielsen scans too. So part of the cons, I would say, since we're talking about self-publishing, is like you get to keep the money of the books that you sell. And when you're traditionally publishing, if I buy these at my author discount, I get to keep the money because I put them up front, but it doesn't count for me number-wise. And so, like what Stephanie said, back to your goal, are you trying to get your numbers higher for your book, or is it? I mean, that's something that you have to weigh. So Givingtons was a way for you to take care of the number side of that. So I just wanted to mention it. I haven't used it yet, but I've looked into it.
Yeah, that's a good point. And the Tina wanted to know if you carry some sort of liability insurance as a self-publisher.
I know, but that's a good idea. And I took a note because I'm going to follow up on that, because I do carry liability insurance on like my coaching side of the business in that piece. So I probably should look into that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's a good thought. And then Rhonda shared a resource from Cara Putman. Then she's got a website or contact, and she invited us to contact her on legalities of at a writers conference. She had mentioned it, so that resource is in the chat too. And
yeah, very cool. Thank you for that.
Yeah, Bethany, do you have some sort of final questions? It's about 5 of, so we can invite everybody kind of back on and finish up here. But you might want to see if there's a final question. Let's come on back in, everybody. And if you are in Writers Chat jail and can't come on back in, put it in the every once in a while, if we clicked on you to hide your video, we have to unclick on you to get you out. So just say it in the chat if you can't get back in, and we'll release you. Please release me. All right, so Bethany?
I think my final question is when it coming to selling the books, because you do a really great job at bulk sales and you mentioned being able to print them out for speaking. So when you're doing your speaking fees, are you including X number of books? Do you give them options, like if they want to order 100 copies or without the copies? Like, how are you getting them to say yes to that?
Yeah, so a couple of things. So when I'm working with kind of like my negotiation for my speaking fee is I always ask the question of, do you want to have books for every attendee? If so, or a lot of times they'll say, I'm not for sure, depending on the cost. So in my contract is I will put, like I basically have a breakdown. If you order 25 to like 49 books, here's the cost, and they can see what the deal is.
Yeah.
So I will put that in the contract of like an option, and then they usually just let me know. So I always include it in the conversation, and then, you know, it's probably 50-50 of what they come back to. And then a lot of times is if they, I feel like I'm pretty good at selling once I get there. So let's say they don't want to include that, is then I will just, let's say they want me to drop my price. Hey, we can only pay you this. Then I will say is, hey, I do have to make sure I have a booth and I do a signing and I can sell my books and make that as part of the negotiation of it. But it just depends. And then I think I told you guys earlier, as I do have a company, so I'm always trying to think like, how can I get them to use my book? And, or I've even thought about, this is one thing that I'm probably going to work on for next year is, let's say I go to an event and they don't have the budget to pay for the book, is could I find a sponsor within their community to be a sponsor of my book? So to kind of offload that for them. And then if I can do that customization on the inside, you know, because I'm doing a little event and I dropped my price, but it's close to my house. That's fine. And, but they came back like literally last minute and they want to do books. So I will make probably about 1,100 in books. And it was like, okay, that was totally worth it. I'm glad I didn't say no to the speaking engagement just because they couldn't pay my speaker fee, because now I'm closer to what I would have made. You know what I mean? So a lot of times it all comes out.
It all comes out. And people were talking about how do you man or woman the back sales table and all that. And sometimes that's something that they could provide, like you said.
Yeah. So a lot of times I do it myself. I do have, if I'm local, like, sorry. Last year I had a gal from the local university with me till May. And so she would go with me. And then I try to always ask them if they can have somebody available to help me. I would say it's those three things. I usually take somebody with me. If I can't do that, I ask them. If they can't, then I'm just running the show by myself and asking people to be patient.
That is great. Well, this has been great today, Stephanie. Really, and it just reminded me again as speakers, and a lot of us do speaking too, how important to have that book and have it available. And this is a route we have to consider anymore. It doesn't carry the negativity that it used to. And so it is a viable route for writers to consider. So we really appreciate you sharing your experience today and stuff. Anything else to follow up, Bethany, before we talk about next week real quick here? And
no, I don't have anything else. I mean, I took so many notes, and
I do too. So I'm excited.
I'm excited to hear how everyone thinks for the after party.
Right. Just next week we have one of our own, and she's on the screen right now. It's Rhonda, going to be with us next week, and we're going to call the episode Rhonda's Resources, because she's our resource queen and is going to bring us all sorts of tips and ideas, I believe, on a lot of her things that she gathers together for her writing career. Right, Rhonda? Do you want to say anything about next week other than that? Give us any hints?
Well, just I love to document there are certain places I go all the time, and they are bookmarked on my computer. So if I find a great resource, I would just love to share with you, because I'm all about streamlining things. Yes. You know, the more I have a great resource I can use, the faster I can write. And so there are some, most of what I'll share is free. Resources, online websites where you can go and do certain tasks very quickly. So I'm excited about it. I will say to those of you who plan to watch next week, bring your own links. Let's drop them in the chat, and we'll just have a link bomb right there in our chat where we can check out what other people are using. And I'll mention some I'm sure you probably already use, but I'm looking forward to learning from you what resources you use as well.
It's a great idea. Great idea. Melissa, maybe when we publicize it for next week, maybe we could put a reminder on the Writers Members page sometimes to bring some ideas of your own to share. Maybe we could, think we could do that next week a little bit?
We could. Also, actually, I think we're going to name the show the Writer's Toolbox, because this is going to be just like a load of tools that writers can use. So I think we were going to amend that title just a little bit.
I love it. Toolbox. That's a great image anyway. It's a great image. Well, thank you. And we look forward to that next week, Rhonda, and stuff. So now we have to do some homework to polish our tools up, to shine them next week and share.
But it is me, so expect to have some fun too. Wow.
Might have who is she, your cousin, show up?
Oh, I don't know. I'm gonna lock the door.
Steph, if you didn't see that episode, that was very interesting. She had a strange person here with us that day. Thank you very much. We'll finish up the recording, but we'll invite you, those that are here today, to stay on for a few minutes after the recording. Stephanie, thank you so much.
Thank you.
This. Yeah,
Thanks
it was
for having me.
Wonderful overview of self-publishing and gave us lots to consider and talking about, and we really appreciate that. And we'll see you all next week on the Writers Chat. Bye, everybody.